Hello, everybody. Appreciate everybody for being here today. We're going to give it a few more minutes to let people start trickling in here. So just bear with me. I don't have any fancy waiting elevator music today, so I apologize. This will be a good one. Lots of information. Share the link with anybody on your team. Forward it out. We'll be going over a lot of passwordless identity management today. Just give it a few more minutes. Starting to see some familiar names in there. I'll give it till about 103 probably, and then we'll kick it off. I think that sounds fair. Got a lot of people joining in. This is our second installment of the M365 series, so it's going to be a great webinar. A few more jumping in here. Do just about one more minute, guys. Appreciate the patience. Appreciate the patience. Some last minute pings here. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. So first off, guys, thank you everybody for taking time to be here. I know webinars are one of those things, you get a lot of them, but I assure you this one's going to be great. Pretty excited today. In our first installment, we went over the attack of the default config, where Mark took a sandboxed M365 environment and gave out a lot of really helpful tips and tricks that you can take to additionally secure that environment without actually spending any money, all found within a fresh tenant. So in our second installment today of our M365 series, we're going to be taking a deep dive into identity management, where Mark's going to walk you through passwordless and all that. So without any further ado, we'll let Mark go ahead and take over and we can dive in.
All righty, let me see if I can get this screen sharing thing going right. There we go. And we'll do the slides. Awesome. So welcome everyone to our next installment of identity management and elevating your security, identity security for your tenant. So without further ado, let's get right on in here. Let me move this over. It's chunking a little bit. Cool. All right. So today we're going to begin by level setting with, just defining what is meant by passwordless and authentication. And then following that, we're going to talk about ways in which you can enhance your authenticator prompts, your Microsoft Authenticator prompts, so you can give your users added context and empower them to make the best decisions. Then we'll look at disabling weaker forms of MFA registration. And then in addition to that, we'll put in some stronger MFA options into action. And then we're actually going to talk about enabling passwordless capabilities with Microsoft Authenticator for your tenant that you may not be aware of that you can actually do today. And then at the end of this presentation, we're going to give that live drawing for the YubiKeys. We're going to have 3 winners today. So before we begin, I'd like to level set with these screenshots have been taken from a relatively new tenant. So depending on the age of your tenant, you may see some things slightly different. So by all means, I would encourage you to get into your tenant and follow along and double check those things and see if you can see some of those variances. And throughout this presentation, I'll be giving you kind of some cookie crumbs of where exactly you'll need to go in your tenant to see exactly where I'm at. So let's get started with those definitions. So I know it may seem silly, but let's take a moment and think about what is authentication? Well, quite simply, it is proving you are who you say you are. And so how can you actually do that? Well, one, you can use something that only you would know, right? Such as passwords, passphrases. And another would be something you actually have, like a certificate, a hardware token, maybe one of those YubiKeys that we were talking about giving away at the end of this presentation. And the third one would be actual biofactors such as your face, your thumbprint, and so on and so forth. So what would be passwordless? Well, quite simply, it's not requiring a password. So at the end, what this means is it would be basically number 2 or number 3. So proving you are who you are by either having something in your possession or using some form of bio to authenticate. So have you met Microsoft Authenticator? Well, we all know it's Microsoft's Cornerstone MFA solution. But did you know that you can up your identity management game and have it serve as a very strong phishing resistant solution and actually use Microsoft Authenticator to provide passwordless authentication for your users? But again, as long as your tenant and your authenticator settings are configured properly. And why is this? Why haven't we heard about this before? Well, most organizations get Authenticator up and running. You get all your users registered. Well, hopefully, right? I know some of you are in a situation where you've got a couple of those people that are outstanding and for whatever reason don't want to get registered. But unfortunately, the reality is pretty much people leave it at the defaults and move about their day, right? So in this presentation, I'm going to dig under the hood per se and really get to some of these advanced features and settings that you may have been aware of, but I'm also going to walk you through the evolution of the tenants and identity management. And I think I'm going to answer a lot of things that you've thought over the years, especially those that have had tenants for a while, and explain where we are today. So, like I've kind of said before, let's move beyond defaults, right? And let's harden your tenant. And what we're going to do at a high level for today's presentation is part 1, we're going to talk about enabling those enhanced Microsoft Authenticator prompts. As part of that process, we're going to make sure that you have a two-way match configuration. And then we'll talk about the specifics on enabling those detailed pieces of your prompts. And then part 2, we're going to talk about removing those weaker MFA registration methods such as SMS text, push notifications, and email one-time passwords. And then at the end, we'll bring all of this together and walk you through using your conditional access policies to actually put these advanced, stronger MFA methods into action. So let's get started. How do we enable these enhanced authenticator prompts? As I was talking about, feel free to follow along in your portal. I know I debated on this a little bit on whether we would go to Azure or go to Entra ID. So I kind of took a middle of the road approach. So what we've got here is going to portal.azure.com, the Entra ID app, and then in the manage section under security. Then in security, go to the manage section and then authentication methods. And you'll see the Authenticator app listed. And then you can click on that and bring up this page. And then I'd like you to configure on or click on the configure tab, which I say is hidden in plain sight because it took me a while before I realized that was an actual separate tab. So when you click on that, you'll get to this page. So these are all of the specific settings within your Microsoft Authenticator that you can modify. And I'd like to start with this top setting, is the OTP setting for your Microsoft Authenticator. That's the one-time password that serves kind of like those old RSA tokens with that rolling number, numeric code. Well, this is that one where the user would have to, find that entry in their authenticator, click on it, and then view that rolling code. So while we're here moving away from weaker forms of MFA, I would encourage turning this setting off. And this is the setting that shows whether or not your tenant is enforcing number matching, where the application prompts the user on their desktop, and then they have to match that number or guess that number in the Authenticator app. And as you can see here, it's grayed out. And I believe it should be enabled and grayed out in your environment, no matter the age of your tenant. But if it isn't, I would encourage you to set this to enabled and make sure that all users have that. This gets you away from that one-way push and just, users just hitting a button to accept, but actually having to pay attention and get the number right. And then the bottom here, I'd like to draw your attention to this. It says show application name in push and passwordless notifications. As you can see here, the default is Microsoft managed. And what I would recommend you do is changing that to enabled so that it always prompts the user with which application is requesting this access. Okay. And then further down on this page is another setting stating whether or not to show a geographic location or a map thumbnail in that password notification. And similarly to what we did before, we would want to change that from Microsoft managed to enabled. So I know I've gone through a couple things, but at the end of the day, here's what it's going to end up making those prompts look like for your users. So you can see here, it will show the name of the app, in this case, the Office Home, and then an actual map of where that IP address is located that is making the request. So I think this is very powerful, very low-hanging fruit, and it allows your users to be able to make better decisions based on this increase of context in their hands, right? They'll know if they're in New York when they're actually in Texas or in India, and the suspicion of these requests will pop out to the surface. So that's it. Real quick and easy. A couple of wins right out the gate. So let's now transition into disabling weaker forms of registration. So what we need to do is start by reviewing your existing, and in quotes, I put it purposely in quotes, Microsoft is now calling this the new unified MFA registration options or registration portal, right? And how do you get there? It's kind of in that same place. We were in the Microsoft Authenticator settings, but we're going to back out a little bit. So it's going to be an Entra ID under Managed Security, Managed Authentication Methods. And then remember, we had clicked here to go inside of Authenticator, but we want to just take a moment and look at all of these that are currently set for your tenant, as this will be ultimately the new unified experience. You want to take time to make sure that these are the right ones that you want, right? So in this example, we have FIDO2 keys enabled, Microsoft Authenticator enabled with a yes, and then a temporary access pass, and then email OTP. So the end game is we only want to end up allowing, by the end of this presentation, we want to end up only allowing the strongest registration options for SSPR, which stands for Self-Service Password Reset, and MFA for your users. However, I want to inform you about two things that can actually contend or conflict with these new unified settings. Some of you may have tried to transition over, and you seem to be getting some old prompts from some legacy things that you thought you turned off in that portal I just showed you. But hopefully I'm going to be able to provide some clarity and explain why some of those things have been hard to get rid of. So One area that can contend with this new experience is what is called the legacy MFA settings. And the other spot is the actual registration options for your SSPR settings. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk specifically through both of these areas now. So for one, we've got to understand, right, and truly look at, is your tenant depending on those legacy MFA registration options? So on that same page, I want to draw your attention to this section right here. So you may have not seen this, but Microsoft has recently published this in the tenants and authentication methods saying that, hey, they're going to be getting rid of the legacy multi-factor authentication and SSPR reset policies and actually depend on this. But you'll also notice there's this manage migration link. Again, some of these things are just hidden in plain sight, and you almost have to seek these out. But if you click on that, it's going to bring up actual 3 options that you can migrate for your MFA registration. And you'll see sprinkled all over this is this notion of the legacy policies as well as SSPR. So what are the legacy policies, right? I keep talking about this, right? And just for the purposes of this demo, right, this was in an environment, a demo environment that I had. So if you were to click on migration complete, you would get, hey, you get a message that you can't do this because, again, your legacy MFA and SSPR policies are getting in the way, right? So let's lean into this. Let's dive into this. So the legacy policies refer to that first iteration of MFA registration and enforcement within your tenant. But how do you get to those? Well, what you would do is you would go into Entra ID. We've been in the authentication methods. You would go to the users, which would bring up this screen, right? So you see the list of your users here. This should look familiar. But what you need to do is click on this per user MFA button at the top. And once you do that, this should start to look very familiar now. Yes. I'm pretty sure we all remember this, right? This is that old screen where you could enable, enforce, and disable MFA. You know, I don't know about y'all, but I kind of struggled with, you know, how this worked and how the new conditional access policies played in, but this should make it all straightforward now. The key is you want to go to, again, hidden in plain sight, that service settings tab. And when you go there, you'll see something like this. And I want to draw your eyes down to here. These are the legacy registration options, which are probably, most likely, still enabled in your tenant. And as part of this process, right, don't go out there, don't go unchecking these things until we get through this presentation. This isn't meant to be a working session here, because if you do this, you're going to get this message that says, hey, caution, when you disable these things, you're going to be dependent on those new unified settings. That's why we took that moment to check first before leaping, right? So only do this if you've done a careful review and really have sat down in this presentation and walked through these details. Now, I'd also like to draw your attention down to here, whereas, you know, I would like to just uncheck all MFA session keeping and memory from the legacy model. So I'd recommend unchecking this piece at the bottom as well. And then SSPR methods is another place that could be in contention. And where you get to those is by going to Entra ID Manage, clicking on Password Reset this time, and then you'll be able to manage the authentication methods inside the Password Reset, which will bring up this screen. So this would be the third interface, right? So the first one was that unified. We just got out of the legacy, and now we're going into the SSPR registration methods. And you'll see here, right, it also tells you that there is a migration to the new unified experience, and you'll need to go in there to manage those methods. And what I'd also like to call out here is, why are these enabled but grayed out? Well, for one, this email option that is checked here is an email option for SSPR. So this would be a non-work email. And then this mobile phone would be an SMS text option, not Authenticator. And since we're talking about moving off of weaker forms, I would also turn off these security questions. So some light bulbs may be going off, right? Why do I still get these security questions even though I turn them off on that new page? Well, some of these old methods are creeping in. And this, if you look closely, is an explainer on why email and mobile phone up top are checked and grayed out, because those are mandatory for admins to do SSPR functions. So that's why. That's why we can't turn those off or alter those. So now that we've walked through where to disable the legacy registration options, as well as the SSPR settings, we can get back to that manage migration and mark it as complete, right? That's going to be in the authentication methods, and then click on that manage migration button. And once all of these things are turned off on the back end, nothing is in contention anymore, and you'll get a fancy green checkbox there. Okay. And then what you want to do is you want to come back around and do a final review of those unified MFA registration options that I'd started with, which is back in the authentication methods section. And again, as you can see here, I think those look good, right? And what you want to do from this point forward, once you're off the old mechanisms, is decide which of those weaker methods you would like to disable. And I keep talking about weaker and stronger, right? So I'd like to give y'all kind of some guidance or view on how we would rank individual MFA methods from strongest to weakest here in this presentation. So at the top of that list would be FIDO2 security keys. Those are the keys that we're talking about in the giveaway at the end of this presentation. And I've got one I'm showing here in the camera, but it's not one of those RSA tokens. It's typically just a little fob that has a little button that you can push on it. And these are real secure. Well, one, a bad actor would have to break in your house or get it out of your pocket. And those FIDO2 keys actually have a rolling alphanumeric code in them. It's not just a 4 to 6 digit number. I can't remember. It's probably 56 characters long. And then you actually have to use a PIN code to unlock it. So very, very secure. Number two would actually be the Microsoft Authenticator app, especially when it's used in a passwordless authentication method. And we're going to get into that towards the end of this presentation. And then there's Windows Hello for Business. I know some of you are thinking, well, all that is a PIN code or just facial recognition, right? Well, I want to kind of turn your head on its ear a little bit. Windows Hello for Business is a little bigger than that. What we were talking about, the PIN codes and the bio, is only used to unlock your computer, but at the end of the day, it's actually using your computer as an authentication token, almost like that FIDO key. And Windows Hello that we know is just that PIN code or method to unlock the computer and confirm you have access or control of that key, which is your laptop. And then number 4 would be certificate-based authentication. This is lower because certificates can be stolen digitally. And then certificates are very difficult to renew. They expire. You have to get those deployed and trusted to every single endpoint that could possibly be dependent on MFA. Number 5 would be those RSA tokens that I've talked about. I think, when they first came out, they were bleeding edge, but now I think they're almost too simple, or that's why they're further down in the list here. Number 6 would be SMS or one-way push notifications, right? Not that two-way handshake that I was talking about earlier. And these are considered less secure because of the SIM swapping vulnerabilities that are prevalent today. And then number 7 would be voice call based OTP. It's similar to SMS, but that's where you confirm the PIN code when they call you. And they're very susceptible to interception. And then on the bottom of the list, we would put email based OTP. You may be thinking maybe that's a swap between 7 and 8, but yeah, we're so far down on the list, but you get the drift. It's because emails are compromised quite often nowadays. That's why we're having this whole conversation, right? So up to this point, we took a look at those legacy pieces which contend with the MFA registration service, that new unified registration service. And we showed you how to successfully migrate off of that and towards the new methodology. And then we also covered ways in which you can disable those weaker MFA methods, right? Leaving only the strongest ones. And then we talked about how we view what is weak compared to what is stronger. And so now what we'll do is we'll transition into putting these stronger MFA methods into action. So up to this point, we've talked about which registration options will allow our users to add to their identities, right? Now we're going to talk about how or what we will allow our users to use in our tenant in order to protect both our users and our data within our tenant. And I heard this somewhere, but it's resonated with me. And I think it's so true now, being in such a cloud-based IT environment, is that bad actors aren't breaking into the environment anymore. They're just simply signing in. So anything that we can do to elevate protecting our identities for our users, well, that just ups the game. So the magic actually takes place in the conditional access policies. And for those of you that are in this presentation that are still using security defaults, you're going to need to move or transition over to conditional access policies in order to take advantage of these capabilities. And here's the great news. This is why it's free. It only requires an Azure AD Plan 1, or now called Entra ID Plan 1 subscription, which most, if not all of you, should be covered for. Now, if you're really running lean when you're only running Exchange Online P1 plans, well, this wouldn't apply to you. This would be for those users or those tenants that have that bundled service where they have his Entra ID Plan 1s. And then I've provided a link at the bottom here that confirms this. So before we go in, I want to give you some very valuable words of caution. Number one, I kind of hinted at it before, but you must have all of your users registered with MFA. Why? As soon as we put in stronger requirements and actually depend on MFA, people are going to get locked out. Not only that, moving beyond getting everyone registered, you're going to have additional challenges when you want to up the game in your enforcement. So if you start talking about enforcing specific forms of MFA, if you have a user that is registered for MFA but not the proper form, well, they'll get locked out as well. And in some cases, I'll talk through this, depending on the MFA method that you want to enforce, not only can you lock your users out, but you have the potential for preventing them from even being able to register for that service. So they're going to be caught in kind of a locked out loop. I'd also call this the new hire phenomenon, but I've got some solutions. I'll walk you through it. So if this is so important, where can I go to figure out who has not signed up for MFA? And then for those that have signed up for MFA, what methods can I tell that they have registered for? Well, it's found in the user registration details under security, and then manage authentication methods again. And then this time you want to go to the monitoring section on the left and click on user registration details. And it'll look like this. So let's look a little bit closer at this. Well, This gives you the option to download, put it in Excel, so you can do your pivots and figure out who's left out, who has what. It calls out the specific ways in which they have the specific registration options that they have added to their identity. A couple of them I've highlighted here. So what I want to be crystal clear on is, even though we turned off some of these weaker forms of MFA, that does not mean that it removes those weaker forms of MFA that have been attached to your user's identity. And in this case, right, talking deeper into the caution here, if we, in our example, were only to allow Microsoft Authenticator passwordless phone sign-in, our user here at the top, Adele, would be locked out because she is only registered for the push notifications. So that's why it's important to zero in, get this report, and analyze where you're at and where you need to get to before you can start turning up the heat on your authentication methods. So I've been talking about CAs is where the magic happens. And the way this happens is through a new mechanism. You may have seen this, but it's called authentication strengths. And to get to your authentication strengths, you would go back into that security area under the authentication methods, and there's an option to click on authentication strengths. And what you'll see is a list of authentication strengths, and there's 3 default profiles, or I'd call them profiles, that are included. And what we'll do is we'll go through those now and talk about which one is the weakest and which ones are the stronger. So at the bottom of the strength category would be the multi-factor authentication profile. And the way I like to talk about this is it has a lot of wars. So you're able to use all of these different factors in order to MFA, right? So again, these are the factors that you can allow your users to use. So one, up to this point, was talking about registration. Now, this multi-factor authentication strength profile will allow all of these factors to be used. And moving in stronger would be the passwordless MFA authentication strength, which only has 3 ORs, or only allows 4 methods of authentication. And the strongest would be the phishing resistant MFA, which only allows 3 forms. So let's zoom in and start to unpack this. So I've highlighted one here. It's passwordless plus Microsoft Authenticator push notifications, and another option for Microsoft Authenticator, just phone sign in. And then you'll see the one in the middle, it has Microsoft Authenticator, but what's missing on the right? It's so strong that they're not even pointing to their own Microsoft Authenticator option. So don't think to just take that one and run with it. What I like to do is I'd like to actually recommend creating a 4th option, a custom option. In our case, we called this the passwordless MFA with TAP, because we copied the passwordless MFA, but we added this 4th option. I'm sorry, we didn't copy. We created this one and we called it password MFA because we wanted to make sure that our users still had the option to use Microsoft Authenticator. And then we added in the temporary access pass. And why did we do that? I'll get into that now. Oh, sorry. I will get into that in a few minutes. But now that we've talked about authentication strengths, I've created this 4th custom option here. How do you actually put them into action? Well, it is again in the CA policies, in that grant section that you're familiar with. And when you click on that, you can see the option to actually turn off the MFA up at the top and check this require authentication strength. And when you do that, you get this drop down, which shows all 4 of those authentication strength profiles that we were looking at. So that's how it works. You transition from just carte blanche MFA to, no, I now want to require these specific forms of MFA. So important things to know, right? I kind of highlighted it before, but I really, really want to hit this between the eyes. There's actually two authentication options. One you've seen listed as a push notification, and the other you've seen listed as a phone sign-in. Well, push is that two-way number matching, and the phone sign-in, that is actually the passwordless phone sign-in option. That is actually Microsoft providing passwordless capabilities for your users. And this explains why when you see push notification and authentication strengths, you can't select it by itself. It's always combined with password. And this is why you can pick the phone sign-in option without a passwordless without a password, because it is, by definition, passwordless. But the key here is, don't just pick that. Users actually have to sign up and turn on that option themselves from within their Microsoft Authenticator app on their side. They have to go in, pick that work profile, and enable it. You can't, as an administrator, configure it for them. That's unfortunate. They have to pull it, right? So if you lock those users down to this mode and they haven't signed up on their phones, they're stuck. This is that scenario that I was talking about. If you do this, they can't even register. It's so locked down. But that's where this tap option comes into play. It's the temporary access pass. And it actually requires an administrator to go in and add that option on that user's account. And I'll show you how to do that right now. So what you would do is you would go into the users. You would pick the user that you want to add that temporary access pass to. And in that user, you click on their specific authentication methods, and you would click on the button at the top to add that authentication method. So I'm here in Adele's profile, her user profile, and I've clicked on her authentication methods, and I just want to click on add, and it'll bring up this menu where you can pick now temporary access pass. And when you pick that, it's going to give you a list of options. Now, I wanted to show this screen here, but on the next slide, I'm going to show you where you can change these settings. But what is selectable here is driven by how you have your tenant configured. And in our case, I believe we had it set for a minimum of 1 hour up to 8 hours. And I chose 3 in this example. You can delay the start time. And then one-time use is set to yes, and it's grayed out because of those settings. So what this will do, even though they can't register right now for passwordless, this would be that new hire scenario, right? How can they sign up? If they can't sign up, it's broken and they're caught in a loop. Well, this temporary access pass will give them that code to then use to log in and get in and register properly. So the tap settings are actually found in Entra ID under security, and it's alongside those authentication methods where we were picking on the Microsoft Authenticator app. And then you would click on its configure tab once you get inside, and it will show these settings down here. And as I was talking about, ours is set to a minimum range of 1 to a max of 8, and it defaults to 1. And then this is where, yes, one time is yes and grayed out, and our length is set to 8 characters. And what you would do is you would hit this edit button to be able to change these settings. So I hope some of this has been useful. I hope that it's been able to explain the interplay between the legacy authentication methods, the SSPR, this new unified approach. I think Microsoft is doing it the right way. I think for a long period of time, it seemed to be disjoined. It didn't make a lot of sense, and it wasn't really easy to find information out on the web. But I think, yes, I've proven that you can use Microsoft Authenticator in a passwordless fashion, right? For free with an Azure ADP 1. But be careful. I know we went fast and hard through all these details. And I've shown you a bunch of big levers, but don't just go in there and start turning these settings on without careful review and wading carefully in this pool. You can potentially lock yourself out, lock your users out, and make for a very, very bad day. But here at Prescriptive, we're here to help. It's a journey, and I promise you, it will greatly secure your tenant, right? The last webinar we talked about was about tackling the default configs and just navigating those pieces. This is truly taking your tenant to the next level and really locking out all the bad actors. So reach out, give us a call. I promise we won't bite. Thank you. And for those of you that may have not been able to have a chance to look at that attack of the default part 1, as we keep calling it, I've included the link here. But I just want to thank you all, and we'll move over to the YubiKeys. So Rowdy,
Yeah, appreciate that. Hey,
Jillian,
Mark,
yeah.
before we dive into the YubiKey, we did have one question
Oh,
from
sure.
Chris Patillo. He asked, can conditional access restrict logons to only our known locations, yet still allow mobile devices?
Can you ask that again?
Yep, maybe I didn't read it well. Let's see. Can conditional access restrict logons to only our known locations, yet still allow mobile devices?
Conditional access policies can be used, yes, to lock down logins only from known locations. The key, right? What locations? Well, locations can be defined by geographic boundaries such as countries. They can also be defined by specific IP addresses or ranges. You can go down to actually 32-bit, mask, so it's only one single IP, or you can do a range. I actually talk about some of those pieces in the first series webinar, getting into some of those country specific, location specific conditional access policies that we like to encourage people to use. So I think it'd be very useful and give you some real good insight on that. That's a good question. Now, when it comes to mobile devices, I mean, that's kind of loose. Mobile device, technically a laptop could be a mobile device. It's a remote device would be the best way to think about it. That can get in a little bit of maybe sprinkling in a little bit of Intune compliance involvement. So not only can you start talking about, you could use Intune to determine whether a device is compliant, and it'll send a signal to conditional access policies to let you know, yes, compliant or no. And then your CAs can react. And in some cases, even, this would be an Azure ADP2, but you can have it make some decisions to say, hey, if they're logging in from an unknown location or a non-compliant device, don't allow it, or it's compliant. I want you to, since it's not a familiar location, I want you to force them to do MFA, or, it kind of gets into some of those risky user or risky sign-in decisions, which would be along with the P2. But again, just staying at a P1 level, you can do your conditional access policies for locations, and then you can leverage some of those Intune capabilities to determine if you want to let only compliant devices in. Hopefully that's answered your question.
I appreciate that. I'm glad you answered that instead of me. I'll tell you that.
There's a lot of details in there.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. So you guys should be able to see my screen. Jillian said it's working. So we had the wheel over here. All I got to do is click it. It'll spin. It'll pick a name. And I believe we have 3 to give away, Mark.
Okay. Awesome.
Yep. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and spin it first time.
Is it big bucks, no whammies?
Oh, my boy Onyx, looks like you're getting a YubiKey. Onyx Rivera, first one. Let me make a note of that. Cool. Yeah, he does, Nick. We all know Onyx. No, I'm just kidding. I love Onyx. All right, we got Jesus Garcia. Winner number 2, congratulations. And then we'll do the last one. Oh, that was close. Governor Henderson, whoever that username is. We will be in contact with you guys after. You should get an email. We got the winners noted down. This will be on demand as well on our website, prescriptive.solutions. I think it's /webinars. I could be wrong on that. I think it's pasted in the chat. Might take a day or two to get it. We will email follow up with a link of the recording as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed all the information that was given today and learned something. And I think with that, I'll let you guys go. Thank you very much. Have a great day.